So, hi everyone, and I'm going to be talking about the shoppers within the independent trade or the informal economy or the gastronomic economy, as I tend to call it. And I guess the starting slide for me typifies in many ways this informal sector. The mom clutching the broadsheet to her chest that she's been using for the shopping, the dad pushing the wheelbarrow with all the groceries purchased at the local cash and carry. And what I'm going to be talking to a large extent is also about trends, because I think that, often we're using research and stuff to understand what has happened or is currently happening, but we generally don't have the tools to look at future trends. And they often say when you see a bandwagon, it's too late. And I think it's critical in terms of whether you're a retailer or marketer, brand owner, whatever it might be, to be anticipating the trends that are happening and increasingly going to happen in this kind of space. I'm not talking about the formal trade, but this is the typical environment within the formal sector. This is how the shopper experiences shopping. In essence, taking a taxi to the formal retail center, carrying their bags, putting their stuff on their heads, whether you're a sangoma or someone who happens to own a trolley. And there's in many places a thriving business where trolley owners are pushing the trolley between the formal retailer and the taxi rank. These are people who also, once they've left the formal center, they get in a taxi, they take a taxi, and they repeat this exercise from the taxi to their home. I'm sure you'll all agree, not the best kind of environment, aspirational environment for your customer. This is some information from Santam. They were talking about people who are driving, and in essence said one of the most notable trends is that more than 50% of consumers reduced the number of kilometers they drove since COVID. These are people who have vehicles. These are not people who are having to ride taxis. And when we look at taxis, in essence, taxis are very much about a fair expense, 10 Rand to 15 Rand one way. That's a local taxi within a township from suburb to suburb. And then you have the out of town taxis, which are 15 to 20 Rand minimum. Generally, some of them are much more expensive. So in essence, the considerations people have is portability, drop off on the street corner and still have to walk home. And then, of course, COVID now created the risk of driving in public transport. And what we've seen is that there's been lower levels of taxi use. The picture on the top left there is a guy who now is playing his guitar to people waiting for a taxi to fill up. If you've ridden a taxi, the taxi has to fill up before you drive off. And I asked him why he was doing this. He was like, since COVID, people are sitting in taxis much longer before the taxi leaves. So just some of the indicators we see. So the taxi cost and this mall shopper experience or formal shopping environment are in many ways the primary determinant of mall retail shopping points. Because one has to think twice before you get on a taxi, from a cost, from a risk, as well as obviously the inconvenience of traveling. And the mall is increasingly becoming less and less aspirational and positive in terms of an experience. And one of the things that the formal sector needs to consider is how do you elevate people's experiences away from this grudge of having to carry your stuff like this. And so what we've seen is that there's much less family trips. I've said in the past that the growth of the formal shopping environment has very much been the last week and the first week of the month. What we're seeing now, and within that, generally you take the whole family, it's a whole experience. You take gogo, auntie, kids, and so on, and you dress up. This has changed quite dramatically since COVID and lockdowns and so on. So we're seeing more solo trips. In essence, the shopper is the person going to the shopping center alone and primarily going to draw money more than anything else, because you can receive, and I'll talk to it just now, you can shop most of these things closer to home. Increasingly, you're wanting to shop closer to home. So in essence, your primary reason for going to a formal point is to draw your cash, which is your primary drive. And I didn't say it, someone else did, I stole the line, but in a world online, the rest of South Africa, in essence, stood in line. And these are the typical kind of environments, especially since COVID, of queuing, and we're talking 42 minutes to 2-hour queues as a minimum, and you're queuing at each different point. So queues are really a primary issue, and I've recently done some work with a financial institution and so on. People complain endlessly about queues. They hate queues. They're standing in queues. This is a major issue within the formal environment, but I'm not here to talk too much about that. So one of the big shopper segments is the grant recipient sector, or the pension sector. And if we just look at it very quickly, there's about 12 million grant recipients earning 20 billion Rand a month. 3 million of those are old age, earning about 1,800 Rand, and 9 million are child grants, earning 440 odd Rand a child. But now we've had this massive additional thing of almost 12,350,000 Rand unemployment grant recipients. And so this is a really big sector. If you add it up, I mean, the 20 billion Rand a month is nothing to laugh at. But what has it meant? It has meant that increasingly pensioners and social grants, in the face of formal unemployment, in the face of reduced incomes in the formal sector, these pensioners and social grants have had a higher influence over shopping. And this has meant a boosting of local neighborhood retail sales. I think trade intelligence call it convenience. But in essence, this increasingly shopping closer, but very importantly, their shopping list is really about essentials, which are staples. People call them essentials, and then home and family products. Household products, family products, and I'll come back to that. One of the very important things is to also, if you look on the left-hand side, those were payment dates in September. And this has been a marked feature of COVID and the government trying to reduce grants, is in essence, instead of grants being paid, most grants were paid into people's accounts on the 30th or 31st of the month. These have since shifted. And so now you have, for instance, in September, 3rd of September was pensioners, social grants were paid from the 7th of September. So in essence, quite a shift. And if you're running a promotion over the end of the month or the first days of the month, you may find that there's no one there because the 7th may not fall on a weekend, and it certainly doesn't fall at the end of the month. So grant payment dates are definitely benefiting formal retailers because people go to the formal environment to withdraw cash, whether it's from a till or an ATM and so on. The rest of the month moves out of that much more into the Spaza sector, which I'll talk to just now. But for me, this is a very important slide, is understanding what are the household dynamics that have happened over the last number of years. It's really important to look at research done called the South African General Household Survey. And in essence, if we look at that, the latest survey happened in 2019, 25% of South African households are one person. 61% are less than 4 members. Now, I keep getting people saying, oh, most households in the townships in South Africa are large households, 8, 9, 10 people. Not true. The vast proportion are small, 1 or under 4 members, and up to 40% of households are nuclear households with parents and children. Only 40% of households consist of two generations. So in essence, you're talking even those who consist of 2 generations are in essence smaller households. So you might have multi-generational, but that does not mean large households. So what does this mean? This really means is this transformation of household composition and people shopping for smaller households. That social grant lady is shopping for herself and her kid. We've seen the incredible growth of backroom rental as a result of this growth of smaller households. The second thing is also the transformation of household formality. If you look at the chart on the top right, that shows the percentage of formal dwellings. More than 80% of households in South Africa are formal households, and these are houses with a brick and block. They and informal dwellings, shacks in other words, are generally around 10 to 12% of our population. So the vast proportion of households are formal homes with electricity and have spent on things like appliances. So this is your typical informal sector, if you want to call it, gastronomic sector, township. The vast proportion, whether it's a little 4-room extended and so on, this is the majority of our population live in this kind of space. And if you look inside those homes, there's been extensive spend on appliances. And this becomes really important because the vast proportion of these 80% of formal homes have a microwave, a electric kettle. In fact, one of the first purchases is electric iron, because ironing your clothes is important, especially for school kids. Then a microwave, electric kettle, microwave, and then fridges are key. And this is important because obviously this determines what you purchase. And I mean, as an example, one of the things we've seen is consumers will say it's cheaper to buy a can of baked beans and warm it up than to boil dry beans, soak them for an hour and boil them for another hour or whatever it might be, because the cost of fuel, whether it's paraffin, electricity if you pay for it, and so on, in essence, is a key consideration. It also means people are able to preserve their food. They cook, they put in a fridge because now they have a fridge. Whether they live in a shack or not, often most homes will have this. And look at SA General Household Surveys figures on ownership of appliances. It's quite extraordinary how high the levels are of appliance ownership. So when we look at the sector in terms of shopping, I've segmented it into 3 segments. I'm not going to go into detail about it, but in essence, I've separated it between the spaza sector, the spazarette sector, and the cash and carry or midi wholesaler sector. And in essence, those are the numbers of those sectors as I've determined it. And I think it's very, very, very important to not call this the spaza sector, because in essence, the spaza is that hole in the wall. I've seen some research done by consumers who've shown, by researchers who've predicted the demise of the spaza sector. In essence, they go and ask a consumer if they go shopping at a spaza shop, and the consumer's opinion of a spaza shop is the top left, hole in the wall, miserable, expensive, often the owner sleeping under the counter. Very big difference to a spazarette, superette, if you want to call it that, and a cash and carry. And so one has to be very clear what you're asking your consumer. 150 billion odd sector, 85% immigrant, and the sector that's disrupting in many ways. This is a slide from some research done by Yebo Fresh and Ask Africa, and I just want to refer to it in terms of, particularly, they asked what is the importance of a spaza shop, and I always love people who confirm what I've written about or said. Why are spazas so important? Good customer service on the top left there. Due to location, clients do not have to travel far to buy products. That refers to that local and taxi fare. But most importantly, credit. Community members who don't have money, I give them credit. Sometimes I borrow them food or money, credit, and even contributing to the community. When there's a funeral, I give them groceries. And this has actually even grown over this hard times we've been through. And it's one of the ways that the informal sector is actually able to compete. And it is something well worth considering. I'll talk about Mampara Week just now, but if you aren't giving credit in some way to people in that last week of the month when they're struggling, you probably are missing out on an opportunity. In your pack that will be shared with you, I've got, we did a 360-degree virtual immersion, where you can actually go into, walk around a spazarette, midi wholesaler. I'm not going to go into it now, but it's in your packs. Please feel free to go through it. But just very quickly, so the spaza sector, is big. It's large, but from a shopper perspective, this is the typical spazas in a residential street. So it's literally walking distance away. The vast proportion of purchases at the spaza are kids who given money and sent running down the road to buy daily goods, run out or top up items. And so that's how the shopper perceives the spaza, and they call them often "oh my friend," and they're often called "okijima mfana," run child, run down to the shop and go and purchase the following. And very much the forecourt of the townships, and that is how consumers see it: sweets, bread, milk, airtime, and so on. But the spazarette sector is really that has been growing as the sector that the shopper in this environment is increasingly shopping at. There's the link. It will be in the pack shared with you. But in essence, this the Spazaret is placed on what I call high streets or main streets or kasi junctions. You'll find these on the main taxi arterials, and good range of stock, primarily larger pack sizes, and focus very much on essentials or staples as key items. The other part of it, as I think Andrea mentioned earlier, most of these Spazarets will not have just one or two brands. They'll have a range of brands, including often call it a no-name brand, and certainly a number 2 and often a number 3 brand to cater for this kind of cost issue. And essentials and combos are a core staple. The other primary thing for the Spazaret is, due to the cost of transport, they focus to a large extent on this large pack sizes. So they will be generally more expensive, but they consider the fact of the inconvenience and cost of carrying 10 kgs of Tastic or 10 kgs of flour or 12 kgs of maize meal, 5 liters of cooking oil, and so on. So one of their kind of competitive edges is the ability to supply these large pack sizes and often provide you with the guy with the trolley who'll push it down to your home. Fairly sophisticated stores, CCTV, barcode scanning, and really huge range, even including oil for the taxi industry, as you can see in the forefront. And at the back on top of the fridge, they also supply the fast food sector with things like packaging material. It's one of the key products that they would offer would be this packaging material. You can see it on top of the fridge, a large sector. And in fact, you'll also find things like 5 liters of sauce and stuff for the Gorda outlets or the Shisanyama outlets and so on within this range of really from expensive products. I mean, this is a shop I took a picture of in Khayelitsha, in Site C in Khayelitsha, which is one of the poorer parts of the township, and just look at the purity, the baby products and so on in that store. What we've seen is that the Spazaret has seriously benefited from COVID. And while sales in the Spaza sector have been relatively flat, the continuing growth of just buying your milk and airtime and stuff is not growing particularly. But the growth within the Spazaret sector due to COVID has really grown. Lockdown, the Spazaret is perfectly placed, literally in the high street close to your home. And they've adapted to the whole COVID thing. Again, I love these signs. And we've seen anything from about a 5 to up to 20% growth, depending on the category, by the Spazarets that we've surveyed since COVID, and certainly benefited from that. As I said, these Spazarets are really on main streets and junctions, as you can see from these images. And very importantly, they're owning prime convenient shopping points. They are not competing with the mall by trying to be in there against a ShopRite or whatever. They are actually increasingly, and whether it's intuitive or deliberate, doesn't matter. The reality is that they are increasingly owning prime convenience shopping points, these high streets, these junctions. Any one of the townships you drive around, you will find that there's a dominance of the Spazaret type outlet on these main streets and these junctions. And so they're convenient, the walking distance, and certainly range and price parity with a formal retailer. And that is their competitive edge. And that is the benefit that the shopper is getting from this. So often, for instance, you can see here the Zama Zama supermarket, they're placed where people get off the taxi when they come from work or when they come from a mall. So when you come from the mall, you jump off your taxi outside the Zama Zama supermarket, you buy your 10 kgs of flour, and then you walk down to your home. But times are tough. Times are really tough, and you see it in what I don't call, but what the consumers call Mambara Week, which is in essence the last week of the month is the toughest. People talk about how my money is longer, the month is longer than my money, or lasts longer than my money. And so how do we see that playing out? In essence, We still have people wanting to buy branded products. You can see the top left there in the ZZ2 tomato boxes, the Huggies and the Pampers placed in single packs. So this need to buy a smaller pack size at that last week. You still want a branded product. You don't want to go to a Hong Kong nappy, but you can only afford to buy 2 or 3 or 4, so on, not a pack of 44. So this growth of this, and this is really related to cash flow. It's not that people don't have the money, but the money is coming in literally in a week's time, in a few days' time, and so on. And this talks to the credit issue I mentioned earlier. Is how do you address this cash flow issue? It's not that people need a loan, they really need to buy their groceries. What you and I might use an overdraft, a credit card for, in that last week of the month, people don't have the facility to address cash flow. So this sector increasingly does this. People are obviously time rich and cash poor, so we're seeing an increasing shopping around, whether it's at the Spazaret or the formal retailer, using broadsheets to find the cheapest products. As opposed to actually buying a cheaper, nasty product, I'd rather shop around more for where I can get my Tastic or my Koo or whatever at that shop. A big growth, and particularly in the Spazarets, and the Spazarets is seeing people downsizing pack size. I still want the brand I choose, but I'm going to get a 500 gram instead of a 1 kg. And we're just going to stretch this and let it last longer. And then on the opposite side, in the cash and carries and the formal sector, often more bulk purchasing if there's a benefit of buying a case or a cart, a shrink, instead of a single unit. And then credit for groceries, I've spoken to that extensively. Certainly one of the ways that shoppers are able to get food. And generally that credit is only on food items, and it's generally only on social grant recipients and those, and pensioners. And it's in essence a rotating credit. You shop at the end of the month, you come and pay for it, and then the next end of the month you need it again. The MIDI wholesalers, the next big sector. And what we've seen is a growth of MIDI wholesalers moving away from, not in terms of numbers, but moving from just being typical wholesalers. These are generally Somali-owned wholesalers. They in a township closer to people, but we've seen a move towards much more hybrid shopping where you can buy single items as well as a pack. And this real move towards this kind of more cash and carry, the cases at the top and the single items lower down in that space. And in addition to that, the MIDI wholesalers, and this is for me, this is some work we did in Soshanguve. If you look at the blue dots, those are where the MIDI wholesalers are placed in Soshanguve, Mabopane, Ga-Rankuwa area. And you can see from that, there are all the primary main streets, and that's where the MIDI wholesalers. So also a recognition, even by the cash and carries, MIDI wholesalers, of that growing main street, high street, Gussie Junction as a primary shopping point away from the formal retailer who's in essence in a mall space. Excuse me. Then we have rural frontier town shoppers. This is an area that's often neglected. And if you, for me, the rural frontier towns are towns like Mthatha, Pongola, Burgersfort, Pururichaba, Mkanduli, and so on and so forth. These are in essence often seen as poor areas, but you can see from the pictures in the left there, that's from Tugela Ferry, where I grew up in Msinga. And there's been massive transformation of housing in these spaces to much more formal dwellings, much more money in these spaces. And what we're seeing is shoppers aggregating to these towns at month end, very much serviced by the Bakkie Brigade. You can see the picture with the Omo billboard in the bottom center there. There's the multitude of Bakkies servicing that. So less than the taxi industry, you have Bakkies, and primarily, not only because of the roads are so bad, but primarily most people here are also bulk purchasing and then going back into their rural areas, so loading the hell out of these Bakkies. These rural towns are very much a social grant withdrawal, social experience, bulk shop, and very importantly, non-grocery purchases. So for instance, building materials, people, is a growing sector, household things, locks, door handles, light bulbs, whatever it might be. So it's not just about grocery shopping in these rural towns. And I believe that, in many ways, in these spaces, the independent and corporate formal retailers are much more important and benefit more than the informal spaza shop or spazarette that might be in the local village. In these rural areas, the informal guy is still very much like the urban spaza that run out, that daily purchases, but actually most people are doing their shopping in these towns. And people like Boxer have certainly benefited from that. Look at the picture on the top right of the Sikhi at the end of May last year. Contrary to times being tough, the other sector that has seen growth is the fast food sector. And particularly chicken dust has really seen an explosion in most places, and there's almost this juxtaposition by shoppers of saying, I'm going to tighten my belt in the purchases, the essentials I buy for my home, but once a week I can go out and I can buy some chicken dust or a gota or whatever it might be. And so we've actually seen a growth in this kind of space. And there's even been a shortage, also driven by imports and so on, a shortage of fresh chicken supplies in the space. And I believe local suppliers like Astral and Rainbow and so on will benefit from this. But certainly this growth of fast food, which kind of is counterintuitive when you look at how people are tightening their belt on groceries. Vegetables, an interesting trend of people purchasing or considering more natural products, considering immunity, considering fresh products are good for you. So COVID throughout the world, but even in the township space, really driven the sense of let me buy and eat products for my family that are fresh and natural products. And added to this is this growth, always been there, but growing, is this growth of the guys in the bottom left and right there of mobile guys, because the taxi ranks are reducing in terms of footfall. For these kind of hawkers, a growing trend of actually loading up your stuff on a trolley and walking the streets. And when you ask these guys, I was chatting to one of these guys and he said to me, I said, why do you carry on doing this after lockdown? People can buy their veggies at the rank. He was like, people have got lazy. They want you to deliver to their door now. So also this trend happening of much more about local neighborhood. I want it easier, this convenience of getting it within my street. In line with that formal growth of formal households, these are the typical township households that you would see, not only their kitchens, as I showed you earlier, but growth of decor, things like fancy ceilings on the top left and so on. And along with this is that we've actually seen an increased spend on non-grocery items in people's homes, spending on home decor, spending on things is, the average spazarette is now stocking things like locks and door handles and stuff on the right-hand side that he never stocked before. And if you look at cash builds, their growth, they surged by 7.3% based on a solid financial performance. And they declared a dividend based on the home improvement boom linked to the COVID-19 pandemic. These are shoppers in township, primarily cash builders serving a certain part of the society, and is very much a kind of township. And we're seeing shoppers buying home decor, doing home improvement, improving their kitchen cupboards, and so on and so forth. I think this is another big space that should be looked at from a retail perspective, a growing trend towards that. As you home more, you're spending more at home on these kind of items. So in ending, what are some of the key things? Smaller households, local shopping, the spazarette, and importantly, the local retailer. If I was a formal retailer, I'd have more smaller shops like Usave is doing. I think Boxer's doing it in many cases. That local neighborhood high street shopping. fast food being spent on in terms of out-of-home treats. You don't have to suffer all the time. Growth of appliances and fridges and how that's impacted on shopper patterns. I do wonder how many of the unrest fridges that were looted have added to this. Shouldn't joke about that. Less social and family mall visits versus before, so more solo visits. The growth of this kind of cash flow limitations and importantly, this Mampara week in terms of how it affects spending patterns and purchasing from your local spaza rate where you can get credit. Vegetables and healthy eating behavior becoming trendy. Decor and a home improvement is going to grow, already growing. The prevalence and the growth of rural towns as a retail point, shopper point for people who are coming out in essence of an informal space and shopping in those spaces. I believe the whole cash and carry thing, KitKats, that type stuff, but including stores like OBC and Roots, where you, in essence, being able to bulk purchase things like your chicken, meat, and so on, but also the informal fast food sector is able to stock up on their polony or their meat and so on at a Roots or an OBC. So growth of that, more or less, some people call them factory shops or cash and carries. Spends shifting from month end because of social grant payments and transport and convenience becoming, transport costs becoming an issue and this affecting convenience. Great, so that's the end of it. I think importantly, there's there's this growing informal retail sector, which is actively and successfully competing with the formal sector and shoppers who are increasingly shopping in informal and in their local neighborhood. Those are the trends going forward. Thank you.